you off for a second. We'll do a little promo, get it going, and
So you want me to use the headphones or forget about it?
I don't think you need them. Actually, does it matter, Ed?
I don't think it matters.
Doesn't seem to with this setup.
So I'm gonna put the mic back on.
The mic's good though. We hear you.
Yeah. Well,
actually, that's not terrible right now.
It's okay.
Yeah, we are live, but it's not as bad as it was.
Okay. Oh, we're live now. Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody.
We're live.
So as people can hear right now, there's a little bit of an echo we were working on before, and that's why we're a couple minutes late. But we've got Evan Ginzburg here. So, Ed, you want to give him the official intro?
Yeah, welcome to Wrestling Bookmarks Live. I'm super excited for this interview.
Oh, thanks so much.
To have you on, because you make a lot of waves on Facebook, and I love all your posts that you put up. And I think you're a pretty interesting person.
I appreciate that.
So I guess to get into it, how did you, get into producing The Wrestler? That was one of the first ones that you did, right?
I was the associate producer. I was basically the quote-unquote wrestling guy. The executive producer is the money guy. I wish I was the money guy. I'm the wrestling guy. So it was a funny story. I was acting as an agent. I had Nikolai Volkov and Johnny Valiant booked in a wrestling store. And out of nowhere, the executive producer's best friend shows up, starts talking to us, and says, have you heard of Darren Aronofsky? And I said, yeah, certainly. I've seen a lot of his movies, and I think the guy's brilliant. And he says, we have a script. We're working on a project called The Wrestler, and I think you guys would be perfect for it. And the next thing I knew, we were in a meeting with Aronofsky, the screenwriter, the executive producer. I brought along, Kenny will appreciate this, Nikita Bresnikov, Tiger Khan, Johnny Valiant, and we just hit it off. We were laughing, and Johnny was like the funniest guy in the world, and Nikolai was like the most charming guy in the world, and we just all hit it off. Next thing I know, they're like, we want to hire you. I'm like, okay, sounds good to me. So I did 5 or 6 casting calls for The Wrestler, brought in Mickey's stunt double, brought in the ring, brought in Mickey's trainer, brought in Necro Butcher, Ron Killings, etc., so on. And, it was a beautiful experience. And what people don't realize is from the day I met them to the day it was completed, it was 7 years. People have no idea what goes into making a movie. 7 years, 5 or 6 script revisions, 5 or 6 casting calls, innumerable business meetings. We tried to get $16 million to make the movie. We ended up with 6, which is basically the food budget on the Avengers, $6 million. So, it sounds like a lot of money, but it's really not. And when the smoke cleared, we were very proud of it. And, just one of the great experiences of my life.
So right place, right time.
Yeah, I mean, what I've always found is one thing leads to another. I was doing a newsletter back in the primitive pre-internet, I should say, days. And next thing I knew, I was invited to do radio. Because of radio, I met some of these guys and became an agent. Because I was an agent, I ended up working on The Wrestler. Because I worked on The Wrestler, I was pitched to do 350 days. It's just, you have to be in it to win it. It's, you guys are doing amazing things with COVID Con and, working with CAC and all of this, and it'll lead to other things for you guys also.
Yeah, no, that's unbelievable. I mean, the fact it took 7 years I thought the movie was incredible.
Thank you.
Is there anything that you would have added or that you didn't add or anything like that?
Oh yeah, I'll tell you a true story. I took basically for 6 months. I took Aronofsky and the team to indie wrestling shows, conventions, anything wrestling related, every weekend for 6 months because Aronofsky wanted it to ring true. We even went to a strip club because the character was a stripper. I mean, we really researched this. So I take them to this convention. And it's Iron Sheik, Nikolai, Moolah, Mae Young, Captain Lou, the whole old school crew. Don't forget the wrestler was made in 2008. So this was, even a little bit earlier than that. So there's nobody at this convention. There's nobody. I mean, there's like 20 people. And it was so sad and depressing that Iron Sheik's head was down on the table asleep. Okay, and Aronofsky kept going because to Aronofsky these guys were legends because he was a 80s wrestling fan. He's like, where are the people? And I said, Darren, sometimes it's like this. So after the fact, that was written into the script. A depressing autograph scene, and
I think that was amazing though because it really set the tone and gave a realism to people that have been to one of these before and seen how it works when the promoter doesn't get the word out right or
it was a depressing scene, and so everybody left like down from it, and next thing I knew it was written into the script. So I'm telling Darren, hire these guys. I mean, it'll, Lou and Nikolai and all of them. And he was weighing it for months. And finally he says to me, Evan, Randy or Mickey would look like what's wrong with this picture. He would be the only guy that wasn't legit. So Darren decided against it. And the only real wrestlers was Manny Yarborough, who was a sumo. He worked early UFC, and Johnny Valiant, who didn't look like Johnny Valiant because his hair was gray at the time. And so Johnny Valiant did the Iron Sheik deal where his head was on the table asleep. And to add to the story, I'm on set when they filmed it, and that's all my merchandise. Those are all my gimmicks on the table. And Darren calls me over and he goes, Evan, I want you to talk to all the wrestlers, walk up to Mickey last, ask him for an autograph and a Polaroid. So Mickey, he thinks I'm an actor, he whispers in my ear, he goes, just improv it. I've never acted in my life. So, I did exactly what they said. I walk up to Mickey last. And I'm thinking, what would I say to one of my favorite wrestlers? And I go, I loved you as a kid. I saw you at the Garden. Can I have your autograph? And he says, what's your name? So now I'm thinking, so I just go Evan. And it dawns on me how surreal this is. I'm playing myself in a fictional movie. Absolutely surreal. And so next thing you know, the movie's done. We're at the wrap party, and Aronofsky does a little speech. I'll never forget it. Am I allowed to curse on your show?
Sure.
I guess.
Okay. So Aronofsky goes, I don't know what the fuck we have, but we have something. I'll never forget when he said this. So we're sitting at Lincoln Center, New York Film Festival, 2,300 people sold out, $40 a ticket. And I'm just watching it like anybody else because I haven't seen the complete cut at this point. So all of a sudden, I come on the screen, and my girlfriend, who's now my wife, looks at the screen, looks at me, and she goes, "That's you." I go, "Yes, that's me." So the movie ends. And it's a spontaneous standing ovation. This is the New York Film Festival, okay? The most prestigious film festival you could possibly go to. And, I tell people this was the best night of my life. It was just like, you put 7 years into something, and it worked. It just worked. I mean, except for Jim Cornette. Jim Cornette didn't like it. Everybody else liked it, but
can only
he thought
imagine.
it was too dark.
He thought it was too dark. That's what he said.
Yeah, he thought it. Randy was living in a trailer. But I mean, a lot of guys
what
don't
I liked
end
about it,
well.
though, I thought that was good because quite often wrestling is larger than life. They make it out like every even like lower to mid card guy is making millions of dollars and living with like multiple women and everything is crazy rock star. But that scene really encapsulated the idea of wrestling outside of the mainstream and showed, I think, a side of wrestling to Hollywood and the rest of the world that is not like that. So.
Well,
super cool.
I knew guys who headlined Madison Square Garden, all the major arenas around the world, literally around the world, who never broke $100,000 and ended up pushing a broom or bouncing at a club. And I mean, it doesn't always end well for these guys. And I relentlessly say, give them 401ks, pensions, health benefits, and some of the fanboys hate me for it because Vince is their hero and WWE is their religion. But I think it's disgraceful that a billionaire doesn't take care of these guys.
Let's see. I saw The Wrestler with friends who weren't wrestling fans. Why do you think the movie resonated with wrestling fans and non-fans?
I have the answer for that. If you watch Rocky, Sylvester Stallone, there's approximately the same amount of boxing as there is wrestling in The Wrestler. There's 13 to 16 minutes of wrestling and boxing in each film. It's about the characters. It's about their love interest. It's about their family. You care. I mean, the problem with WWE today is you just don't care about a lot of the characters. I mean, when Sergeant Slaughter was wrestling the Iron Sheik, you cared. It's you have to care. Whatever the entertainment is, that's what it comes down to.
What did you learn from the whole process of filming that?
What I learned is follow your heart. Follow your heart, because we couldn't get the money that we had hoped for. We would go into Ring of Honor shows and start filming. We didn't have the money to hire thousands of extras. So we would go into these shows. It was guerrilla filmmaking. The fans didn't want us there. One time, Darren had to get in the ring and cut a promo. Listen, guys, we're going to do something you'll be proud of. Just let us shoot for a few minutes. They wanted to watch their wrestling. Yeah. Okay? So at one point, this is a funny story. Darren has us meet Nicolas Cage, because at the time, Nicolas Cage was big box office. So where did we meet him? In the basement of the Hammerstein Ballroom, Ring of Honor, because he wanted this to be like hush hush. He's like, Evan, you're the point man. Go get Nicolas Cage, bring him up, to the locker room, and So Nicolas Cage, this was the funniest thing. He's watching this. He thinks it's a shoot. He thinks it's like UFC. He has no idea what he's watching. He's watching Ring of Honor, and he loved it. And the nicest guy, him and Mickey Rourke, nice, down to earth, gracious. Sometimes the biggest stars are the nicest, most humble people. And sometimes, you have some indie guy who's a total asshole, It's totally out of perspective.
Who are some of the wrestlers that worked on the movie, like behind the scenes?
Like I said, I brought in Ron Killings. I brought in Romeo Roselli. I brought in Necro Butcher, Andrew Anderson, Papa Don, a lot of the top indie guys from that era. I kept telling Darren to hire Nigel McGuinness, because Nigel was on top of his game back then. But he just thought This is another thing you learn during the process. He would be like, Evan, Mickey's not a huge guy. You can't have these guys towering over him. So they cinematically, he didn't want like guys who dwarfed him. So he would hire guys that were, relative to his size. And Mickey had been a boxer. He's an athlete. He's a tough guy. And, he picked it up, pretty quickly. I mean, there was a stunt double, but for the most part, Mickey was doing, the wrestling, and that's why it rang true. A lot of times you see a movie and you go, that's a stunt double. That's not the guy. But Mickey, he really pulled it off. And he's just a tremendous, he's an actor. He's, forget the celebrity. The guy's an actor. When he says, I'm a broken down piece of meat to his daughter in the film, that's like Brando and On the Waterfront. I could have been a contender. They'll be watching that 100 years from now, and people will cry during that scene. The guy's a tremendous, he won the Golden Globe, and he lost to Sean Penn at the Academy Awards. This is no joke.
That's the biggest crime in movie history.
Well, I guess Sean Penn's character was more sympathetic. He gets gunned down at the end. But, yeah, Mickey, the Golden Globe is, a phenomenal honor also,
Let's see. Why did Nicolas Cage not end up in the movie?
Well, that was the point I was trying to make. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I was too roundabout. Darren just said Mickey's the right guy. He said Mickey looks the part. Mickey looks like he's been through a lot, which he has. Mickey was top box office in the 80s, and he left to get punched in the face in a boxing ring. This isn't your traditional trajectory. He was a leading man in the 80s. This guy was a big, and he walked away. He didn't like the politics. He didn't like the bullshit in the film industry. And the wrestler really brought him back. And he did not make a ton of money for the wrestler. His payoff was really Iron Man 2. He got $1 million for Iron Man 2 off of being hot from the wrestler. Yeah.
Wow.
So to answer a question, basically, Darren went with his heart and said, well, Nicolas Cage is bigger box office, but Mickey's the right guy for this. So, respect to Darren, for taking a chance, because, Mickey's name was not a huge draw at that point in time.
So I'm going to channel Jim Cornette right now. Okay, so let me channel him. Okay. These sons of bitches come out and they make a real dark movie like this that really exposes the business. Was that the idea all along, or was it going to be more of a happy-goody film when it first started in script form? How about that?
Well, you have to understand. First of all, let me just say, I love Jim Cornette. I think the Midnight Express are the greatest tag team in history. I'm a huge fan of Jim Cornette. So, when I heard he didn't like the film, it was kind of like a knife in my heart, but what can you do? Well,
personally, I liked it dark, but
yeah, look, if you know Darren Aronofsky, his movies are all dark. They're all dark. It wasn't going to be, a goofy comedy. I mean, this is where the guy leans. And, you guys do a lot of stuff on books. I wrote a book about growing up in East Flatbush, Brooklyn, where I was basically brutalized. I was the only white kid on the block, one of the few in the public school, and that wasn't dark enough for Darren Aronofsky. Okay, Darren likes stuff dark. What's that?
Apartment 4B?
Apartment 4B, like in Brooklyn.
That's it, yeah.
I was mugged, robbed at knife point, jumped by gangs, etc., so on. This wasn't dark enough. So he loved the book, but he wasn't going to make it into a movie. So, yeah, look, I respect Cornette's love and dedication to the business. Believe me. But you can't deny that a lot of these guys don't end up well. Right. I mean, if you have, let's say, a movie star signing autographs at a convention, they're not working for $300 like some of these guys who need the $300, the wrestlers. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of sad that it's come down to that. And, you shouldn't have to push a broom if you headline Madison Square Garden. Not that there's anything wrong with doing an honest day's work. I'm not looking down on the job. I'm just saying these guys should have been taken care of.
I mean, isn't that the entertainment industry in general?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I tell people all the time, I've worked hundreds of conventions over the years across the world with Johnny and Nikolai and Jimmy Valiant and Lanny Poffo, a lot of guys you've had on your shows, as an agent. And what you find is you're sitting next to a rock star who hasn't had a hit in 30 years, sitting next to a porn star who was exploited also, sitting next to a wrestler, sitting next to somebody else. And they're all there because they basically need the money. Every once in a while, you get somebody, a Sylvester Stallone's promoting a movie at the San Diego Comic-Con. That's different. But most of the time, these guys are there because they were exploited. And ex-boxers, ex-wrestlers, ex-porn queens, they all end up in the same convention, hawking their autographs. It's not as glamorous as people think.
Right.
Yeah. Broken meat, right?
To a degree. I mean, fame is fleeting, and, a Paul McCartney or a Mick Jagger is, they're not hawking their autographs. They've been on top for 50, 60 years. That's very unusual. At some point, look, I've made a half dozen movies. I didn't get rich off of one of them, but when I'm gone, people be watching these movies, and that's kind of your legacy, and I'm proud of every one of them. So, sometimes you do things for the art, and art survives. With Chadwick Boseman, I was telling people, this guy made great movies. This guy didn't do schlock. I mean, Get On Up, the James Brown movie, 42, the Jackie Robinson movie. It wasn't just Black Panther. This guy left a legacy. I've heard guys like Dustin Hoffman say, I regret a lot of the bad movies I made because, this is what you're leaving behind, because now the guy's 75 or 80. And, Michael Caine will tell you, Jaws 4 bought me a house, but it's an embarrassment. Chadwick, this guy left a tremendous legacy. And a guy like Aronofsky, he's not going to do schlock for a paycheck. Simple as that.
Yeah, I would. I mean, me and Kenny have this podcast at least.
Hey, look, you guys are doing a quality podcast. You know how numbing it is to hear 47 podcasts where they all review Raw and SmackDown? It's numbing. It's numbing. You guys are doing quality work, and it'll survive in some capacity. Really.
So, Evan, what I'd like to know, and I just never asked you this before, how did you meet and come to know Johnny Valiant?
This is a great story. I was teaching, and I brought him in to meet the students, and he was so charming and so gracious and so intelligent, and I didn't know what to expect because I remembered the Valiant brothers, and they were wild, and so this middle-aged graying guy comes in, conservatively dressed, and it was not what I expected, and we just hit it off, and we're having dinner afterwards, and he says to me, "Why don't you manage me?" I'm a school teacher. I was always involved with wrestling in different capacities, but so next thing you know, I said, "Johnny, you should be doing a one-man show. I mean, you have all these great stories and you're hilarious." And next thing you know, we're taking his one-man show all across the country, different venues. And I'll tell you, this business is rough. I was with Johnny the day Jerry died, and he was devastated. I got the phone call, and I had to tell him Jerry died. And, you're on the road with somebody for a year, 2 years, whatever their run was when they were WWF champs, you bond with somebody. And I was with Johnny when Captain Lou died, and it hit him hard. And I was at home with my wife watching a movie. I forget which one. The movie ends. I go on the computer, and I have 6 messages about Johnny being dead. So they're asking me, like, what happened to Johnny? And I'm just hoping it's one of these, fake celebrity deaths. But unfortunately, it wasn't. Guy's crossing the same street he crossed for decades, got hit by a car. I mean, legit, the guy wasn't drunk or anything. It was just a rainy, misty day. The guy didn't see him. And, so, it's a rough business. You lose a lot of friends along the way. And, but that's how I met Johnny. I invited him to a class to speak, and he was gracious enough to come down.
How did you find him? Like, was he your first kind of in with the business, or were you
well, I had been doing, like you guys, I had been doing radio for a long time.
Right.
So, I had various contacts, and you just ask the right person. You have a number for so-and-so, and, I was able to contact them easily enough. We both lived, ironically, close to each other, Queens, New York, and, who knew the guy was practically a neighbor, So he was a Pittsburgh boy, but he had moved to New York to pursue the acting. And just like in wrestling, people don't realize how many nights that man traveled hundreds of miles to make $50. He paid his dues in wrestling. Next thing you know, he's headlining the Garden, again and again and again. The Valiants headlined the Garden like 4 times in a year. Besides they were on fire, the Valiants. A lot of stuff pre-Hogan, pre-WrestleMania, pre-rock and wrestling, people don't realize. The Valiants were huge. So, he paid his dues as a wrestler, and then he was really paying his dues all over again as an actor. And he had a bit part in The Sopranos as a bodyguard for one of the gangsters. And ironically and painfully, they never let him talk. One of the greatest talkers in the history of the wrestling business, The Sopranos, in all their wisdom, did not give the guy a single line. Can you imagine? Yeah.
That's crazy.
There's something to be said for, the wrestlers that drive around everywhere just for that $50 and, trying as hard as at acting and maybe not doing a good job, but still sticking at it, or not making the headline roles. A long time ago, you might have said this. I don't know if this is a common catchphrase of yours or not, but you said, make art. And can you tell me what that quote means to you? And if that is kind of what some of the wrestlers do, are they making art? Are they, because they're not worried about money in a lot of cases,
There was a movie called Once. My screen just froze up, but it's
we're
okay.
Good here.
There's a movie called Once about street musicians in Europe, and the band who did the music was the Swell Season, and they actually acted in the film. It's a beautiful film. It's as great a music film as you'll ever see. And next thing you know, they were struggling musicians. Now they're their best song at the Academy Awards. Best song. And they got very emotional. And they said, create art. Create art. And I borrowed that, pretty much. And, when you get guys like Roderick Strong, who have never had a bad match, and Homicide, who's never had a bad match, and Kevin Owens and guys like this, at some point, you create art long enough, and people will notice. I'm convinced. And a lot of times, these guys will put in 10 years before they really, really make it. And today it's a little easier because you can merchandise yourself and hawk your T-shirts and such. But back in the day, these guys, would work the territories, and not make big money. And finally, a guy like Pat Patterson, he's 35, 40 years old, and he's headlining the Garden. You see what I'm saying? That was a long road to get to headlining Madison Square Garden. Today, with the crazy spots and bumps, a lot of these guys are winding down at 35 or 40. It's a different business. Yeah.
Can you tell us some of the art you've made?
Well, we're very proud of 350 Days. And when you say you made, it's always a team effort.
Sure.
I mean, there's directors and multiple producers, but 350 Days, it was funny. And this is another Darren Antola approached me, and I had no great interest in doing another wrestling movie because I just said to myself, how are you going to top The Wrestler? It's really almost an impossible task. But the guy was so sincere. He's a blue collar guy, and his partner David Wilkins and Fulvio Cesare, the director. I mean, they really believed in this, and they asked me to come on board, for help, pretty much to do what I did for The Wrestler, to help in all different capacities. Find this footage, find this photo, find this, find that. And of course, they'll publicize it as well. And, so one day I'm with Darren and the editor's name is Michael Burlingame. And Michael Burlingame worked with, get this, Paul McCartney, Mariah Carey, John Cougar Mellencamp, Sting, not WCW, the Police, Sting, okay? So I'm talking to this guy, and he doesn't know wrestling. And I said to Darren, I said, he's perfect. The guy's perfect. I said to Mike, I said, make a movie that'll make an 80-year-old woman cry who's never watched wrestling. I said, this isn't a shoot interview. We're not going to point a camera at a guy's head for 2 hours and ask him who was the booker in Chattanooga in 1972. Who was the booker in Ottawa in 1933? This isn't what we were doing. I said, make a movie that'll make a woman cry. And he didn't know the headliners from the mid-carders, from the Carpenters. He just cherry-picked the most poignant, powerful, moving material, and he made the movie we asked him to make. And we're very proud of it. And like any other piece of art, like I said, Cornette didn't like The Wrestler. Some people were like, well, I knew a lot of the information in here, but it wasn't intended as a shoot interview. So on the level that we try to make this film, it's gotten rave reviews for the most part, and we're just very proud of it.
So
who got all the wrestlers together for the movie?
Basically Darren Antola and Fulvio Cesare. Fulvio's a Canada guy, so you have that Canada connection. Bret Hart, King Kong Mosca, the Wolfman. The Wolfman. Who else interviewed the Wolfman? I saw the Wolfman wrestle Bruno in 1974 at the Nassau Coliseum. The Wolfman's in this movie. Farmer Pete, one of the great midget wrestlers. These are all Butcher Paul Vachon. These are all. Oh, Don Leo Jonathan's in the movie. The great Don Leo Jonathan. And as I'm mentioning these names, it reminds me how many of these guys are gone. Because again, this movie took 6 years. The Wrestler took 7. This took 6. Huh. People, again, every photo, every film clip has to be legal, signed for, contracted. People have no idea what goes into a movie. They see a shoot interview. You drag a guy into a hotel room. You point a camera at his head. You obsessively ask questions for 2 hours. It's a different beast than a documentary or a scripted film. Not that I don't enjoy a good, shoot interview from time to time, but it's just a different beast.
So could you tell us some of the things that you did for the film? I'm not sure that everybody knows what an associate producer does. I do know, I remember at one point getting a direct message from you asking, hey, Ken, do you have a picture of a wrestler in a beat up bar, maybe where we can see the drinks in the background? Like,
Exactly.
it was a very specific question.
Yeah.
So
The editor would say to me, Evan, the theme is these guys are on the road 350 days a year. That's why it's called 350 days. Guys like Ric Flair were on the road, Harley Race, NWA champions, did literally 350 days. Bret Hart told us 336 days. Wow. Greg Valentine said approximately 320 days. So this isn't like some exaggeration. So the editor would say to me, Evan, we desperately need photos of the wrestlers in their cars, getting out of their cars, carrying bags from their cars. Because otherwise, you just have talking heads, So when they're talking about the travel and you see an exhausted wrestler getting out of a car, that makes the scene that much more poignant, as opposed to, yeah, exactly. Okay. You cut to the various photos. So then they would say, Evan, Vince owns 98% of all the footage, that exists, but we need footage of superstar Billy Graham. We need footage of this guy. And I would find the indie promoters that actually had footage of these guys that Vince didn't own. And, we would lease it or buy it for the film.
What were some of the holy grail things that you found in your scavenger hunt?
We had footage of J.J. Dillon wrestling in Japan. It was literally silent films. That's how old it was. Yeah. So there's JJ with the dyed blonde hair wrestling, in Japan. And, some of the footage is actually quite rare. And, but again, it wasn't so much about that. It was more about, telling this story that these guys, think about Starrcade and Survivor Series. When were they? Christmas and Thanksgiving, the biggest shows of the year. So, these guys had kids at home. They were away. They were wrestling. Their bodies were getting beaten up. They were on the road driving hundreds of miles, taking planes, instead of being with their family on Christmas and Thanksgiving. Some of them weren't there for the birth of their kids. Some of them weren't there for their kids getting married 20, 25, 30 years later. They were still on the road. Sherry Martel's not in the movie, but I interviewed her one night on radio. She said to me, Evan, I was on the road 15 years straight. I didn't see my kid grow up. And she said it very emotionally. In our movie, 350 Days, Wendy Richter said, I couldn't have a kid. Where was I going to put the kid? On the ring apron? I was on the road every night. So people don't realize the incredible sacrifice. I've had wrestlers say to me, I'm always in pain. Quote, always. Okay? So that's a tremendous sacrifice to make to entertain people. And, you talk to the old school guys and they're like, I just had a hip replacement. I need a knee replacement. My back is horrible. I was Kowalski's in the movie. I'll never forget, the first time I met him, he was struggling to get off the couch. This was one of the greatest athletes to ever step foot in the ring. You could argue that Kowalski is top 5 all-time heels. But as an older guy, the arthritis was so bad, he struggled to get off a couch. That's a sacrifice. Abdullah the Butcher's in our movie. He's in a wheelchair now. It broke my heart to see Harley Race in a wheelchair. You know how many times I saw Harley Race headline the Garden, headline other arenas? Harley Race used to come into the Garden as NWA champ. He'd wrestle Dusty Rhodes, Backlund. This guy was magnificent. Then you see him, he's an old guy in a wheelchair. People don't realize how these men and women have sacrificed for us. And, when I hear the fanboys defend no benefits. No, they know what they're getting into. No, they don't. If you're a kid and your dream is in front of you, doesn't matter if you're a rapper, a singer, an actor, you're going to sign on the dotted line, and you don't realize you just signed a bad deal. And, you're not thinking on my 40th or 50th birthday what my body's going to feel like on a cold, rainy day. You don't know what you're getting into. So at bare minimum, billionaire, promoters should take care of these guys because they certainly did well for the most part.
Yeah, I've always wondered why that is, because the wrestlers are on TV more than NFL players are, and it's not even close. Who's making more money?
Who's making more money? I know school teachers in New York making more money.
Right.
There are guys making $40,000 a year, $80,000 a year. There's school teachers on Long Island, top of the salary, top of the payroll. They're making $150,000. They're making more than wrestlers on popular TV series. I mean, I'm not talking, Randy Orton or the huge names. I'm talking NXT guys, and just because you're on TV doesn't mean you're rich. It's and as you saw mid-pandemic, you get future endeavored dozens and dozens of wrestlers. How ruthless is that? I'm sure Shane and Stephanie and Triple H are very secure over at WWE, but the dozens of guys who will let go mid-pandemic, I'm sure most of them cannot use the term "I'm rich." It's just a misconception. But a lot of fans defend the corporation and not the worker, which I don't understand.
Yeah, I wonder why that is. But yeah, I mean, I feel like they missed their opportunity to make a change, right? Because I think the wrestlers are kind of replaceable right now.
It's good that AEW took off. I mean, the timing isn't great mid-pandemic, but it's good that there are alternatives. Japan is always, New Japan is huge. I mean, there are options for wrestlers, and like I said, there's marketing and merchandise, which was not popular back in the day, pre, rock and wrestling, pre-Hulkamania era. There wasn't a lot of merchandising, but again, the Bullet Club is the exception. Most of these guys are not swimming in money. The Bullet Club figured it out. It's a tough business. It's always been a tough business. I think at some point they need a union. If guys are on TV, they should be in SAG, just like an actor. I mean, if you're doing bits, if you're doing skits, if you're doing comedy on a TV show, on a WWE TV show or AEW, I mean, you're acting. It's acting. I mean, a lot of it's horrible acting, but it's acting.
I just watched the Bob Costas interview with Vince McMahon. I don't know if you remember that, where Vince leans in and he's all, and he calls it a soap opera. He's like, this isn't really sports. This is like a soap opera. Okay. So you can't really have it both ways. Are they contracted showmen, or are they actors, or are they athletes? I think a union would have been great for that back when was it Jesse Ventura was pushing for it, or someone was pushing for it?
Yeah, Jesse Ventura was pushing for it, and it didn't work out. It doesn't mean it can't change down the road. Look, there's a long trail of guys who died before their time, and much of that is because wrestlers are pushed beyond human endurance. There's no off season. So what happens? A guy's in pain. He's scared to lose his spot. You might have to take some painkillers. You might have to do what you have to do to get through that match, through that week, through that month. And at some point it catches up to you. And I mean, WWE has one of the greatest talent bases in the history of this business. I would say it's quite possible it's the greatest, or maybe next to Crockett in the 80s with the Horsemen and Midnight Express and Road Warriors and Rock and Roll Express. That was a great talent base as well. But WWE has so many guys that they really don't use well or barely at all, that you could give guys a couple of weeks or months off. I mean, why not during, like I was saying, during the holiday season, Thanksgiving to Christmas? Let some of these guys rest, or right after Christmas, the beginning of the next year, and let them heal and let them, get off the road. And it's very. I mean, now they're wrestling maybe 200 to 250 days. I mean, the pandemic is just a weird thing because they don't have the house shows. I'm saying in general, WWE may go 200 to 250 days, but that's still, quite a toll. The wrestlers have this expression: "There's only so many bumps on my bump card." So how many? You throw a guy through the air and he lands. He could be the toughest guy in the world, but gravity isn't fake. Gravity is as real as it gets. So, yeah, I mean, the old school guys were very proud. They were like, we work light, we worked the crowd, we had the psychology, and they didn't have to do 37 high spots. I mean, these high spots going to wipe these guys out at a much younger age. Simple as that.
So if you look over Ed's shoulder over here, he's got all that merchandise and all of this memorabilia and stuff. And I don't have a whole lot. Ed knows I only have a little bit of stuff. But do you have any sort of memorabilia or anything you collected over the years that's related to wrestling?
I've never been a, quote, collector, but I've saved every program from every show I ever went to. Because it has sentimental value. So I have, Madison Square Garden programs from the 70s and Nassau Coliseum and Westchester.
Did you circle the winners? Were you one of those?
As a kid, I would write in the winners, and I would write in, the time. And so to me, that has sentimental value. I think I own 3 action figures that were given to me. One was Jimmy Lennon, who a lot of people wouldn't even know. He was the ring announcer at the Olympic Auditorium. In New York, we grew up with the LA wrestling on TV here. So that had sentimental value to me. And Greg Valentine gave me one of his action figures. And I think I have an Abdullah the Butcher somewhere. I've never been a collector, so but programs I like because I was there. It means something to me. Yeah.
Oh, I do like the programs. I wish I could find some old ones that I don't have. But
okay.
Well, Evan's not going to sell you his. So.
Nah, I wouldn't. You know what's going to happen? I'll die one day. My wife will just toss everything out, not realizing it's worth a small fortune.
Well, what's her phone number again?
I'll leave it to you guys in my will. Yeah.
So, Evan, what do you think about wrestling today versus when you were watching in the early '80s?
Honestly, I think, like anything else, there's pluses and minuses. I think WWE, with the exception of NXT is great because it's wrestling. NXT takeovers are great. But WWE, Raw, SmackDown, whatever, it's like penance for sins I committed in previous lifetimes. It's brutal. Brutal.
It's too long. It's too long.
I mean, for an old school fan to see what Vince turned this into, it's horrifying. Now, AEW, I enjoy much more. I love Pentagon and Phoenix and, Young Bucks. So I'm not one of these guys who, they're just spot monkeys. I'm not one of those guys. And I think Okada and Naito and some of these guys in New Japan are as great as anybody that's ever stepped foot in the ring. I mean, so I'm not one of these guys. There's been no good wrestling since the territories. That's nonsense. But I think you still have to be discriminating and pick and choose what you enjoy. You don't have to just watch. I mean, this is a funny story. The end of 2017, I made a New Year's resolution. I said, I'm not watching any more Raw or SmackDown. I said, I'm just not. I'm not a kid anymore. I'm not wasting all those nights of my life. So instead, I exercise, I write, I watch a good movie. You don't have to watch something if it's painful to watch.
My problem is I feel like they all look the same now. Like they all wear black for some reason.
The Vince McMahon brainwashing that they all have to be body beautiful with a 6-pack of abs. If you know your wrestling history, some of the greatest workers, Harley Race, Pat Patterson, Ray Stevens, Dick Murdoch. I mean, these guys, were not 6-pack of ab guys. These guys were beer belly guys.
Right.
And who's better than those guys? I could go on and on. So the idea that you have to look like a fitness model, that's a Vince thing. I mean, I don't quite get it. Even some of the guys who were out of shape, I mean, just plain out of shape, like a Buddy Rose or even Dusty Rhodes. These guys were great. They were great.
Let's see. Somebody wants to know about your Wrestling Then and Now news sheet that you published.
Okay. I published that for about 20 years, from approximately 1990 to 2010. The internet pretty much was the final nail in the coffin for most newsletters. But if people really know the early history of wrestling fandom, there were newsletters back in the 70s and 80s, pre-internet, where that was the place to get your information from. Even ring wrestling would have actual results of cards from all over the world, pre-internet. And it was funny. The sheets actually helped smarten people up, because you'd be watching a guy who's a face in your area and he's a heel in another area. You're trying to figure this out, or vice versa. Like Freddie Blassie was loved in LA and hated in New York. So you start to get a better understanding of how this all worked,
Were you a tape trader too? Did you get tapes from all around?
Yeah, not religiously though. There were certain guys I just loved, like a John Tolos, and I would be like, get me a best of John Tolos, and I could watch that all day. But I wasn't one to just watch endless cards, by myself. I like the live experience, going to the arena and being with people and meeting the wrestlers and getting autographs. Again, it was a different world back then. You'd wait by the stage door. I used to wait outside Madison Square Garden in the 70s. I was a kid. The wrestlers would come out. So Superstar Billy Graham's the heel. He's nice as could be. George Steele, supposedly couldn't speak. He's friendly, he's signing, he's taking photos, So all these bad guys are nice. So who comes out? Dusty Rhodes, Andre the Giant. They won't sign one autograph for one kid, okay? It was so disillusioning, but it was also, again, it just smartened you up. You go wow, Lou Albano's nice, So here's a funny story. The door at Madison Square Garden, where they would bring in all the equipment, concerts, wrestling, boxing, whatever, it was clearly labeled 7 feet. 7 feet. It was labeled. So Andre the Giant would walk out, not have to duck. Absorb that. He was promoted as 7'4". he was actually shorter than 7 feet. He had a giant afro, which made him look that much taller. I would say the guy was like 6'10" or whatever. I'd see him wrestle Ernie Ladd. They were basically the same size, you know.
Let's see. Somebody wants to know: have you seen Popeye Richards wrestle?
Not live, but I remember him. I started watching in 72 and started attending in 74. So I do remember him. Yes. But I don't think I saw him live, though, to be honest.
Interesting. Okay. Now, what do you think about? I've always felt like there was a sociological aspect to wrestling, where in the 80s there was a defined good guys and bad guys, right?
Right.
And then there was like an era where you don't really know who the good guys and the bad guys are.
As much, right?
Yeah.
People are kind of rooting for the bad guys.
Back in the 70s, it was very ethnic. You had Pedro Morales, the Puerto Rican hero, Ivan Putski, the Polish hero, Bruno, the Italian hero, etc., so on. And that was, you know, the basis of it. So each demographic would draw a certain amount of fans, and it was a big man's territory, WWF. So a giant would come in to face Bruno, because Bruno was like Superman. So you had to have an Ernie Ladd, or Don Leo Jonathan, or a Superstar Graham. You had to have a huge guy to be convincing that somebody could possibly beat Bruno. Same thing with Pedro. Same thing with Backlund. This was always the system under Vince Sr. Ethnic heroes and the villains. This is funny. You know, you have to realize the 70s was not that far removed from World War II. So a lot of the villains were Nazis. Waldo von Erich, Baron von Raschke, Hans Schroeder, you know, and we had just gotten through the Cold War. So James Bond was always fighting the Russians. So the villains, Ivan Koloff, Nikolai Volkov, okay. You know, this was very meat and potatoes, simple. You know, ethnic heroes and Cold War and Nazi villains, and it worked. So then the 80s came.
Different time. Yep.
What's that?
I was going to say it was a different time, too.
It was a different time. And you also have to understand, a lot of the fans, myself included in the beginning, we were total marks. You know, we thought it was real. You know, Bruno would be, I was a kid. So Bruno's getting pummeled by some monster, Killer Kowalski, who's twice as big as him, and you're feeling every blow, you know? So what happened? This is a great story. All of a sudden, the bigger kids, they're telling me Superstar Billy Graham is going to beat Bruno April 30th, 1977 in Baltimore. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And that's exactly what happened. And then you realize, wow, it's a work. So, but then you say, wait a second. Bruce Lee didn't kill Chuck Norris. Clint Eastwood didn't shoot those guys dead. You know, so you enjoy it on a different level. And it's still a great art. Then I'm sitting in the garden one night, again, pre-internet. Who comes out? Dynamite Kid and Tiger Mask. We barely knew who these guys were. We had like a vague knowledge they existed. This is pre-internet. These guys are doing moves we had never seen. We sat there with like our mouths open, okay? It was like we were in shock because we're used to like Swede Hansen, like these big lumbering guys, super heavyweights, you know? So that brought in a new era where smaller guys were pushed, the Bret Harts and Shawn Michaels, and these guys are great. So again, I'm not one of these, there was no good wrestling since the territories. Shawn Michaels was an artist, and Bret Hart was an artist, and a lot of these smaller guys, and you know, Rey Mysterio even. I saw Rey Mysterio as a kid, in his teens at the Auditorio de Tijuana. If you told me that day this guy would one day be WWE champion, I'd say you're out of your mind. The guy was like 120 pounds or whatever at the time. He was 16 or 17 years old. So
it's funny how legend really perceives these guys, because I remember as a kid looking in a wrestling magazine, and like you said, you didn't know who Dynamite Kid was, but you sort of heard his name somewhere,
exactly,
right? So you probably saw it in the back.
Yeah.
Maybe saw a little picture of him or something.
Exactly.
Like that.
Yeah.
They finally show up. It was a different world back then, but it was pretty neat.
It's like he was good enough to make the magazine on page 87, so he was climbing the ranks. It was a different world. Yeah.
So, what do you think the future looks like for wrestling? Like 10 years from now, what do you think?
I think we're heading more towards these filmed wrestling matches, like the Hardys and the Undertaker, and it's not my thing. I mean, I appreciate the art of it, but I think we're going to head more towards that because it guarantees content. I mean, look at this pandemic. It's changing the business, and it's interesting that New Japan has live audiences now. If you've seen it, they seat them like there's spaces between each person. There's nobody sitting on either side of them. They're all masked. They're not allowed to yell. They're worried about the spit.
Yeah.
Okay, so but there are live crowds. At some point, there'll be a vaccine. I think people will be hungry for wrestling, and I think it'll come back in a big way. I think the issue is it's very without the fans on TV, it's just not the same feel to it, and I think it's going to hurt their ratings meanwhile. Right. And I don't know, like even WWE with this Thunderdome stuff, to me, it's just distracting and tacky. I don't think that's the solution. I'm looking, I saw a few clips on YouTube, and, it's like, oh, there's a guy dressed as a KKK guy. And this, it's like you're looking more at the crowd than you are at the matches. Right. It's a distraction.
I saw who they had Chris Benoit and then a guy getting his head cut off.
Yeah, I mean,
jeez,
it's insane.
Yeah, so Chris Benoit was watching, going, "What is this crap?" It's very distracting. The ratings are down. It doesn't have the same feel to it. Wrestling is meant to be in front of a crowd. I'm sorry. Right. Same with boxing. I've been watching boxing on Showtime. It doesn't feel the same. Yeah.
You're not excited for the Mike Tyson, Roy Jones Jr. fight?
Not particularly. I'll watch it. I'm a big boxing fan, but technically it's an exhibition.
Right.
And you don't want to see two old guys get hurt.
I don't want to either.
Let's say Tyson knocks him unconscious. What joy am I going to get out of that?
I mean, does Mike Tyson need the money? Is that why he's doing it?
I think he needs the boxing.
Oh.
It's like Randy the Ram and the wrestler. I think he needs, to be doing this part. That's how he was weaned. That's his DNA. Yeah. Comedians need an audience. Actors need an audience. Singers need an audience. Wrestlers and boxers need an audience. Teachers need an audience. Oh, really? Teachers miss students.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I'm a comedian, and people have been asking me to do like these Zoom comedy shows. I'm like, I'm not interested in that.
You're a stand-up comic?
Yeah. I worked in New York for 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have, Nico White?
I don't know.
Nico White's been up on stages since he was like 14. He's done thousands of shows. Oh, guy's tremendous. So I have friends who are professional stand-up comics. They tell me they go into colleges now. There's a lengthy contract. You can't make this kind of joke, that kind of joke, this kind of joke. And they'll pull the plug out on you mid-set. The chronically offended.
I did a show a couple of years ago at a college where they wanted to see my entire set word for word.
Yeah.
Beforehand. And I was like, okay.
This is not a good thing. Look, I'm liberal, but I do not believe in censorship and cancel culture. And you let an artist do his thing. Seriously.
Well, that's one of the things that's kind of led to the downfall of WWE, in my opinion. I think once they went public, they lost the ability to do what they want.
Look, you don't have to do something that's over the top offensive, but at the same time, you can't watch every word if you're a comedian. It can't be vanilla. It's like people are like, I love The Miz. I love The Miz. I don't love The Miz. I think the guy's totally vanilla. It's like, I'd rather watch Abdullah the Butcher stab somebody in the head. It's like, you have to have some edge. It's wrestling,
So, Evan, what are you doing for a creative outlet now? Anything? You got any projects in the work?
I am finishing a book as we speak. Yeah. And nothing like it has ever been seen that's wrestling related. It's 60 short stories. Maybe half of them are wrestling stories, tracing my life. For example, I had a friend, you may know, Gordon Scazzeri. He promoted the AWF. He put over $100,000 into a TV taping, and it was one of the biggest disasters in the history of the wrestling business. It was a total disaster.
He paid for fans, right? Is that what we're like? The guy that paid for fans? That's him, right?
That I don't recall, but he lost his shirt. That was the end result. And to make a long story short, he was a good friend of mine, and he had health issues. And he died in a welfare hotel. He died in a welfare hotel. Okay? That's one of the stories in this book, how this business can destroy people, promoters. Another story is about a wrestling fan who was a historian, and he ended up killing himself. This isn't your traditional, happy road stories kind of book. It's a lot of poignant, again, like 350 Days, a lot of poignant, powerful stories, that really I don't think have been done before. Just looking at the business from a different perspective, and my life in the business, being on the road with these guys, and what I learned from them, what I experienced with them. Johnny Valiant wrestled for oil sheiks 3 a.m. in the Middle East, looked into the crowd, and there were no women. No women. You're wrestling in front of oil sheiks 3 a.m. This is some kid from Pittsburgh who knocked on Bruno's door timidly and said, "Please, sir, please train me. I want to be a wrestler." And years later, he's looking across the ring in Madison Square Garden, and there's Bruno, wrestling Bruno and Strongbow against the Valiants. Just stories like these unbelievable stories that really haven't been told. I'll tell some stories about Making the Wrestler also that haven't been told, and etc. so on. I'll tell you a funny story from The Wrestler. We're waiting for Necro Butcher to show up to Aronofsky's office in Brooklyn, and he's late. He's really late. And, we don't know what's going on. It reaches a point where it's getting late and we're tired. So I pull out the contact sheet that I had for him. I call the number. It's Necro Butcher's mom. It's his mom.
Yes.
So now Necro Butcher's mom is going, I'm worried. Where's my boy? Where's my boy? You know, a boy who staples dollar bills to his head and goes through panes of glass. She's worried about her boy. So he shows up. He finally shows up, and his real name is Dylan. You know, like the poet. You know, so just this soft-spoken, you know, lovely guy. You know, just the opposite of what you would expect.
What he does, yeah.
Yeah, but Necro Butch's mom was worried about her boy. So, you know, it's just all kinds of crazy stories. I'm sure you guys have a lot also. And, you know, it's I've had some of the best experiences of my life in the wrestling business. And I've met people I wouldn't piss on if they were on fire. That's the kind of business it is. Seriously. It's I've stood my ground. Me, mild-mannered English teacher, film producer, whatever the case may be. I've stood my ground, and I'm like, give Johnny Valiant the money you promised him. Give Jimmy Valiant the money you promised us. Where I'm like the enforcer, you know. I mean, I'll tell you a story. We're at a show one night. Johnny Valiant's wrestling Jimmy Snooker in the main event. And they're not kids. They're not kids. Okay? The place is packed. They put on a good match in spite of the fact they were both in their 50s at the time. Okay? Maybe it wasn't the same match it would have been 30 years earlier, but they put on a good match. Comes time to pay. I go up to the promoter, you know, we're going to leave now. And he goes, well, you know, it wasn't a good crowd, and can we give you this instead? And I'm like, motherfucker. So it's like these guys just killed themselves for you. You know, give them the money you promised them. Every seat was filled in this place. You know? And that's the side of the wrestling business a lot of people don't see.
Yeah,
you know?
it's horrible.
And you know, personally, I have a love-hate relationship with the whole thing. Whole thing. And this book is going to tell a lot of these stories, and you know, and a lot of stories that are not wrestling related, which will freak out some of the wrestling fans who only care about wrestling. But again, you do it for the art. You do it for the art. It's not. You do it to please yourself and do something that you feel is special and different, as opposed to maybe it'll sell 10% more books. You know?
Yeah, I think a lot of wrestlers, maybe if they're watching this now and or on tape or what have you, they can relate to that moment when you look to get paid and the promoter's nowhere's around. And then when you find him, he's quick, always in a hurry, trying to get something done at the end of a show, running over here, and he's clearly avoiding you and doesn't want to pay you what he said he was going to pay you.
Or ran out the back door.
Yes, that too. Shady promoters.
I've gotten on planes with Johnny, travel 1,000 miles to a show, a convention. We're online, like it's the lunch line to get paid. And these geniuses are paying from the door. So it's going from 20s to 10s to 5s. And I'm like, Johnny, we better be at the front of this line. You know, or we're not getting paid after traveling 1,000 miles. And, you know, it's a brutal business. And it's not like they're getting paid, you know, huge sums of money to begin with. You know, so you're just trying to get what you were promised, move some gimmicks, get back on the plane and get home alive. Basically, that's the goal. You know, it's a tough business, man. It's after a while, the older you get, you know, it's like it's great to sit with your childhood heroes. It's great to be friends with them. It's not so great to see them exploited. Exploited. You know, as an agent, I would take the traditional 10 or 15%, or sometimes nothing. If there was no money there, I'd take nothing. These were my friends. There are agents out there taking 50, 60%. 60%. Okay. I don't see it. I just don't see it. It's a brutal business. It's not going to change anytime soon. And what happens? Some of these guys break through. I remember Mick Foley sleeping in cars for $50. I'd see him on indies. Guy hit it big, you know. There are those cases where there's a happy, ending to it all, but I think it's more the exception to the rule.
Let's see. We got a question here. Do you foresee a future in small indie promotions? And do you think the wrestlers have a false impression on the future of a career?
I think today there's more outlets for indies. You can watch it on various, systems live, and they can make some ancillary money and such. But I think ultimately 95 to 98% of indies are not going to make money. I don't think that's ever going to change. And, what I tell the wrestlers, it's almost like an uncle speaking, to a nephew, a niece, or whatever. I'm like, get yourself an education, get yourself a trade, and have something to fall back on, because the Mick Foleys, the Young Bucks, these are the exceptions to the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Most of these guys are not going to make the big time. They're going to be weekend warriors. And, if you love it and it's your art and your passion, that's fine too. But, if you can't pay the bills with it, have something to fall back on. Mm-hmm. You don't want to be bouncing at a nightclub, on a minus 10-degree night outside the door, in January. I mean, this isn't the end game. Have an education, have a trade, and just understand the human body. You can't do this forever. If your body gives out. What's that?
Oh, no, go ahead. I was gonna say I tell the same thing to my kids. I'm an English teacher too, and I have a discussion at the beginning of the year: the difference between dreams and goals, where you can actually and meet a goal with hard work, but you can't always achieve that dream no matter how hard you try. A lot of times there's luck invested into it. So having that backup plan is huge, and I think that's a super important message to put out to the kids like that.
I tell every young person, follow your dream, passionately, give it 110%, but have a plan B. Mm-hmm. You still have to pay the bills. Like I said earlier, I'm very proud of The Wrestler in 350 Days. We did a film, Wrestling Then and Now, on pennies that, has a new audience because they put it on Amazon Prime. I'm very proud of these films, but I always had teaching to fall back on. It took 7 years to do The Wrestler. It took 6 years to do 350 Days. That's a long time between paychecks.
Yeah.
You follow? It's
Sure.
So you have to understand, just creating art and passion, sometimes that's not enough to pay the rent. You still have to pay the rent.
Well, are you guys familiar with Captain Hernan Cortez?
No.
He invaded Veracruz with his navy in like the 1500s, and when he landed on land, he had his people burn the ships. So they had no choice but to win.
There you go. That's an interesting strategy.
Well, because I tell you, I know a lot of, my problem being a comedian was that I came from a middle class background where I didn't want to sleep in my car and travel around the country, and I didn't have enough money not to work. So, the people that I know that have made it because they went 100% all in, and that was it. They were either gonna go broke, or they were gonna make it.
For all your comedian friends, they should follow Dobie Maxwell on Facebook. Dobie Maxwell is a middle-aged, working comedian who's, his whole life he's been a road comic. He'd go from town to town to town, headline or host, and he paid the bill. He's always paid the bills as a comic, but he's also, done radio and taught comedy and, multiple streams of income.
Right.
I mean, because sometimes, again, the art itself is not sufficient to pay the bills.
It's true.
I mean, Kenny's a book publisher. You're not selling millions of Danny Davis books, no matter how good it is. No, seriously. I mean, when my book comes out, I'm not going to sell millions of copies of this. So you still have to pay the bills. It is what it is.
Well, Evan, thanks so much for coming on tonight. When can we expect your new book to come out?
The writing will be done this month, and then it's basically the production. I'd love to have it out by Christmas if possible. If not, it's stories going back decades. It's not like there's any deadlines. So, it'll be out in the next few months, I would say.
Cool.
Okay.
So next week we're going to have Andrea Kellaway. She's a Canadian photographer, so she's kind of like a Mike Lano, like we did before with the the photographers talking, and she's going to show all kinds of neat stuff that she's worked on, and also being a female behind the scenes, which is a little bit unusual in the wrestling system, and also I think that'd be pretty neat to hear from her. And we're going to see some pictures that she's taken, as well as other pictures that she's going to dig up and talk about, from an artistic standpoint. So that'll be fun next week.
Yeah, and we're still working on getting the meat sauce Virgil to come on.
Nice.
So Eddie, do you ever have people go, tell me a joke?
Yes,
Comedians hate that.
They do. I just say what Jerry Seinfeld says, like, what are you, a doctor? I want you to do surgery right now.
Yeah.
Comedians don't tell jokes, we tell stories.
Exactly.
Right.
All right, Evan, thanks so much, buddy.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate the support. Thank you so much.
Thanks again. Thank you.
Thank you.